All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Beauj Box 2025. Can't believe it's our fifth iteration of doing this. I'm all decked out in my Team Milk onesie, in my tasting onesie. Thanks to Lindsay Bourne and Robert Meek that's out there. Appreciate y'all. But yeah, every year, gotta bust it out. This is what I wear to taste Beauj every year. Anyways, welcome. We're tasting this guy, 2021. We're starting it all off with the Prunelle de Navacelle Beaujolais Latingnie is what we're tasting today, which is a little bit something special, and I'll get into that in a second. But before we get into all of that, just want to talk about why Beauj Box. I mean, a lot of you, most of you, have been joining me every year for the last 5 years, and for many of you this is your fifth iteration of Beauj Box, which I very, very much appreciate, so thank you. But it's always been something really fun that I do. Beaujolais is one of my favorite wine regions in the entire world. It's just delicious. I mean, it's essentially what got me into natural wine, and it kind of hits all the boxes. It's approachable, it's delicious, but there's also a lot here that you can really geek out on. It's just it's kind of really good place. Use the same grape, Gamay is what we're basically gonna be talking about. All 12 bottles in this box, except for one, which is next week's wine, which is half Pinot Noir, half Gamay, which is something a little different, and we'll talk about that when we get there next week. But outside of that, it's pretty much all Gamay. It's 100% Gamay. So we're talking about a very small region. We're talking about 45 miles in length, about 7 to 10 miles wide, depending on where you are in Beaujolais. So for those of you who are in DC, I mean, that's basically like the distance between here and Baltimore, but obviously much narrower. But imagine that there's basically 12 different 10 crews, and then usually I used to put 2 different regional crews, so Beaujolais and Beaujolais Village. But here this year I'm doing a little bit different, so I'm gonna do Beaujolais Latingnie, which is actually an appellation that's been here since the 30s, but it's kind of an emerging area. Dare I say, they're shooting for the maybe becoming the 11th crew. But some growers don't necessarily care about that. But it's basically an emerging area. If you ask a lot of crew Beaujolais producers where there's an exciting place outside of those 10 crews, this is where they would point to. Beaujolais Latingnie has been on the map for a while, so I was really, and then particularly. This producer, when it came across, there's never enough inventory in DC to really highlight this appellation. So I'm pretty excited to do that this year. We just caught it at the right time. Anyway, it's a small area, but that's divided into 10 crews and 2 regional appellations. There's a bunch of little small ones, sub appellations like the Beaujolais Latingnie, but in general, we're talking about Beaujolais, Beaujolais Village, and those 10 crews. All made from the same grape, all pretty much goes to the same, very similar kind of a vinification method. But yet they taste very different depending on where you are. So it's a great area to kind of use as a case study to really delve deep into what causes that stylistic difference in wine. Some of it is a production method. They're not all exactly the same. But whether it's grown on granite versus grown on volcanic soil, or is it more sandy, is it more clay, is it more south facing, is it more east facing, all those things that make a difference in the final resulting style of the wine. And then this is a really good way to kind of delve deep into that, because all the other variables are pretty much the same. But more, beyond all of that geekiness, it's really just delicious. So I'm pretty excited to put this together for 5 years in a row. I mentioned this briefly, but it's also what Beaujolais is what got me into natural wine, but it's also that's how it is for a lot of people, because this is the kind of the birthplace of modern day natural wine. And then I know we have some rookies in Beauj Box this year. So in case you're not familiar with that term, natural wine, it's essentially wines that are farmed organically, sustainably, or biodynamically. It's basically no chemical substance in the field. And then in the cellar, we're talking about no addition, no additives, no subtraction. We're basically trying to make it as purely as raw as possible. So if you were to see a nutrition label in the back of a wine bottle, it would basically say grapes and perhaps maybe little sulfites. But outside of that, nothing else added to the wine, nothing else filtered out, nothing else fined out. So that's kind of like what I consider as a natural wine. There's no definition of natural wine in the wine world, which is one of the challenges of making natural wine this kind of a big global movement. But it is getting there. It's getting big. It's growing for sure. But yeah, through the Industrial Revolution, through the 70s and 80s, everything became very, very mechanized and very in the interest of predictability and control. They started spraying the fields to get rid of threats from diseases and different things. And also in the cellar, they started sterilizing the grapes as soon as it arrived in the cellar and pitching it with the lab-grown yeast and then feeding it things like yeast nutrients, manipulating the color, manipulating the acid levels, sugar level, all these things just to basically get to the final resulting wine that we think is palatable. But there's a lot of manipulation that happens, and that's the majority of the wine that's available on the market. So natural wine is basically these kind of wines that are moving away from that. They're basically saying like, fuck you, we're not going to do that. We're going to go back to the way our great grandfathers used to make wine before all of that kind of a modern nonsense with the science and all of that was available. And that kind of movement, natural wine movement, started here in Beaujolais. And this is kind of where it grew, and from there it spread into all the natural wine bars in Paris, and from there it just kind of blew up and went all over the globe. And here we are. I wouldn't be running a natural wine club in DC if it wasn't for these folks who kind of said we're not gonna stick with the status quo of this chemical commercial farming, and we're gonna try to take it back to the kind of authentic, real, raw, honest wine that their ancestors used to make. So it's a place that's really meaningful to me. So yeah, I'm glad to be here again. And I'd be remiss too if I didn't talk about, and a lot of you veterans on this in Beauj Box have probably know this already and have heard me talk about them for a long time, but maybe it's a good review. But there's these 4 names. They're called Gang of 4. If you are gonna be drinking natural wine, if you're gonna be drinking Cru Beaujolais and Beaujolais, you are gonna be coming across these names. These are some of the most French-sounding names, but it's Marcel Lapierre, Jean Foillard, Jean-Paul Thévenet, and Guy Breton. Those are the 4 guys. And there were many, many others that were already making wines naturally or with a minimal intervention already in this area. But these 4 particularly got the attention of eponymous American importer by the name Kermit Lynch. And you might have heard that name. He's a big, big importer. He's essentially who brought Beaujolais to America. In many ways, not just America, but kind of all over the world. But basically, he's the first ones who started bringing in these quote-unquote natural Beaujolais into America. Particularly these 4 guys were the first 4 that he brought in and imported into America before anybody knew who they were, what they were doing. And then, kind of the tenets of what these 4 guys were trying to do, and amongst many other people who were also doing it, is basically, again, moving away from lab-grown yeast and using native yeast only, the yeast that's found on the skins and the actual grape berries themselves, and then refusal to chaptalize. That's just a geeky word. This is something that's actually rather popular or allowed in a lot of winemaking in cool climate places, which is Beaujolais is one of them. where they can add sugar because it can't get to the right level of ripeness. The berries struggle to ripen and develop enough sugar to develop into alcohol. So they will actually dump sugar into the must, which is the squeezed grape juice, before it ferments. And that practice is called chaptalization. And it was a very much of a widespread practice in Beaujolais. And these four guys, again, amongst other people, said, no way, we're not going to do that. We're going to focus on growing the best grapes we possibly can, developing the sugar in the field, and then not add anything, not manipulate that juice to get it to where we want it to go. And then they also refuse to filter. They are big proponents of non-filtering and non-fining, and we're going to talk about that, and you're going to hear that word come up quite a bit in this Beauj box, or if you join 6 Foot Wine Club. A lot of wines that I feature are non-filter, non-fined wines. So filtering is a physical way of removing substance out of wine. Fining is a chemical way of removing things out of wine. Oftentimes it's a protein, leftover proteins from fermentation that makes wine cloudy, so they will usually throw in some other compounds to kind of fine all that protein out of the wine so it's clear and like translucent. What these four guys believed, again amongst other people, believe that the filtering and fining not only took away from the true kind of nature of the wine, but it just didn't belong to, you didn't need it. If the wine was made well, you shouldn't have to hide behind filtering things out and fining things out. So yeah, natives refuse to chaptalize, refuse to filter. Obviously, there are a lot of other things that have been added to that kind of quote-unquote natural wine philosophy or requirements to be called natural wine. Again, there's no definition of natural wine in the wine world. So when anybody says this is a natural wine, you should ask, what does that mean to you? Because it means something different for everyone. Anyways, like I said, even beyond all of that, it's just delicious. It is something, and you know, particularly this box, every year Beauj box price goes up a little bit. I'm trying to keep it, you know, as low as I possibly can, but just like everything else, the price just keeps going up. And you know, I sound like such a grumpy old grandpa, and you know, I say things like when I taste with my importers, I'm like, I remember back when, you know, Cru Beaujolais used to cost under $15 wholesale price. But now these are all, you know, in their 20s. Most of the wines that we are tasting in this year's box is all well into the mid 20s, if not upper 20s. So yeah, Beaujolais is getting expensive. With the Trump coming in and tariff going into effect, it's probably gonna get even more expensive. So, you know, this is a good time to kind of load up on Beaujolais and drink more Beaujolais. So here we are. But anyways, let's get into it. So where are we? You all have access to this map. This is in the Google Drive, but I will also put it in the email that I'll be sending out as well. But there's a map of France. And if you look at that map of France, right in the smack dab in the middle of France, just under Burgundy is Beaujolais. So that little pinkish kind of area is Beaujolais. So southern neighbor to Burgundy, right? The great noble, great Burgundy, that's home of some of the best Pinot Noir and Chardonnay grown in the world. Well, just south of that is basically where we are, where we'll be spending next 12 weeks. They do make red, they do make white, they do make rosé, they do make some sparkling as well. So everything is made here. They do not make dessert wine. I have not tasted any dessert wine made in Beaujolais. Also, I don't think you can put Beaujolais on the label if you make a dessert wine above certain RS level. I don't think the appellation law allows that. But you can find red, white, rosé, sparkling still. So yeah, there's some range that you can find here. Let's see, there's another map. This is actually if you look deeper into Beaujolais itself, these are kind of how it's divided. And then this is kind of what I was talking about. The map is called Wines of Beaujolais. So it's divided into these different sections. Well, actually, before we get into that, let me talk a little bit about what happened, the history of kind of Beaujolais. So Burgundy has been there for the longest time, right? From the Sister Monk times of the Romans that come here. Essentially, they were the first ones to plant grapes here. So viticulture has existed here for a very, very long time. And it's always been to Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and back in the days, Gamay used to be there as well. So Gamay used to grow all through what's known as Burgundy now. And there's no distinction between Burgundy and Beaujolais at the time. But, you know, the archbishops of Burgundy decided one day that Gamay just, you know, doesn't do quite well in Burgundy. And Pinot Noir is the king. So he decided to kick Gamay essentially out of Burgundy, saying that it wasn't capable, it wasn't a grape variety that's noble enough to make Burgundy wine. So after Gamay got kicked out of Burgundy appellation, it ended up moving south to where currently is Beaujolais. But little did they know at the time, because you know this kind of geological data wasn't available, the Beaujolais soil type fits Gamay way better than Burgundy. So Burgundy, what we're talking about is essentially clay and limestone. So Pinot Noir, Chardonnay do really, really well in limestone. So obviously, no doubt, no surprise there that Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are what came to be the major grapes of Burgundy. However, Gamay doesn't do so well in limestone. They do much better in granite. And essentially, Beaujolais is where the soil type changes from limestone to granite. And there are many different types of granite, and here it's not just singularly granite. There are some different types. There's some clay, sand, as well as some alluvial soil, as well as a lot of volcanic influence that runs through here. And even within granite, there's a pink granite, and there's blue granite, and there's you know, all these different types that exist. And these are the things that we're going to get into, how those things make a difference. But in general, just know the one thing you should take away is that Gamay does really well on granite, and this is where you find it. So if you look at that map, the wines of Beaujolais, it's kind of divided into north and south. The Beaujolais kind of divides into two different sections. So southern half, that's the generic or regional appellation of Beaujolais exists. The pink area. So it kind of runs on the east as well as like the southern half of the entire area is just a regional Beaujolais. If you ever heard of George de Boeuf, you see it in like Safeway, you see it in grocery stores. He punches out a lot of Beaujolais Nouveau. He's partly responsible for why Beaujolais got such a bad name in America, because the Nouveau that he used to bring in, that he used to make, and they used to hit the market in America, which is really bad. They're just kind of a commodity wines, and a lot of that came from this Beaujolais down here. The soil type here becomes a lot more clay. There's not much of granite left here anymore, and sand as well. So you're talking about just really just kind of a non-complex, just kind of one-noted kind of a flavored wine that's more meant for like a mass consumption. And that's where this comes from, actually Beaujolais. And then all the 10 crus that I mentioned, which are featured in Beauj box, are in the northern half, right? So you see it up there from Saint-Amour, Juliana, Chenin, Moulin-à-Vent, Chirouble, Fleury, Morgon, Régnier, Brewery, Côte de Brouilly, all of that. And then there's another regional appellation called Beaujolais Village, which is basically, it's a regional appellation for the entire, basically second northern half. Anywhere that comes from that kind of a purple area on the left west of those 10 crus, as well as people wanted to declassify their wine. If let's say you're a producer in Morgon, and for some reason you want to declassify your wine because it just didn't quite meet your quality level, and you don't want to taint your reputation as a Morgon producer, so you can create per se different bottling or cuvee and then label it Beaujolais Village instead of Morgon. So and also if you were to blend across different crus, then you can only call it Beaujolais Village, because now it's not 100% from one cru. So Beaujolais Village, whenever you see Beaujolais on the label, know that it's coming from the southern half of Beaujolais, from a very clay dominant soil. When you get to Beaujolais Village, now we're actually getting into granite and volcanic soil, so a little more complexity. a little more minerality, but it can come from anywhere in the northern half. And then again, those 10 crus exist there as well. There's a fun little mnemonics to help you remember all these 10 crus. I don't know if you ever need to remember all 10 crus. I had to learn this because, you know, I was studying for an exam. But in case you ever wanted to be a rock star at a Beaujolais wine trivia night, which I hope you don't go to because you are not that kind of nerd. And if you are, I'm sorry that I have turned you into such a monster. But either way, here are the 10 crus. So it's some, going from north to south. So some Saint-Amour, Japanese. So it's some Japanese Canadians marry French Canadians making really beautiful children. So that's 10, right? So some Saint-Amour, Japanese Julianas, Canadians, Chenas, marry Moulin de Vaux, French Fleury, Canadians Chihoul, making Morgon, really Renier, beautiful Bruy, children Côte de Bruy. So there you go. So if you ever need to remember all those 10 crus, there you go. You got some mnemonics. I always thought it was fun. Anyways, so that's in general where we are. But like I mentioned, this week, what we're kicking it off with is Beaujolais Latingnie. And where is that? So also in that Google map, you'll also see I've also included Beaujolais Cru soil map. So you'll kind of see all the different soil types represented by different colors. You see that kind of like a reddish, orangish color that kind of runs through the entire majority of Beaujolais. That's granite. There are different kind of granites depending on the color that's there. But then how you see in very northern tip, Saint-Amour where Saint-Amour and Julianas is, that green kind of a thing, that's volcanic. And then you see that some of that thrown in the down south as well. In the Côte de Bruy is a lot of driven by volcanic. Even in Morgon, certain parts of Morgon, right around the mountain, Côte de Pie, is also volcanic. So again, various different soil types that exist right here in Beaujolais, and they're all divided, kind of demarcated by those cru lines. And that's kind of what makes this area fun, like I said. It's a great area to kind of deep dive and see how these different soil types affect the final wine style. But anyways, if you in case you're wondering where Latingnie is, it is essentially, if you look at the wines of Beaujolais, the cru map, it's west of Renier, essentially. So it's right west of Renier, just north of Bruy. And then so Renier is that green area, bright neon green, kind of in the bottom third of the 10 crus. That Renier, just west of it, is budding right up against Renier, is Latingnie. It's less than like a kilometer away from the demarcation line, borderline to Morgon, and then it's just north of Bruy. So we're talking about traditionally, Beaujolais Latingnie has always been kind of classified as Beaujolais Village because it does fall into that purple area, which is Beaujolais Village territory. So a lot of Latingnie producers, you know, for years, for decades, have just kind of classified themselves as Beaujolais Village, and then even people who bought grapes from that area have just kind of classified as a Beaujolais Village. But the Beaujolais Latingnie appellation has actually existed since the 1936. But that, like I mentioned, it is an emerging area. This is where a lot of the new producers are eyeing, kind of seeing somewhere outside of these 10 crus to kind of source their grapes. And this is usually where they name the first area, that's most exciting area outside of the 10 crus. The Beaujolais, the Latingnie has existed since 1936, like I mentioned, but for a long time, it's about 110 hectares total, so not huge. It's big in terms of like a small sub appellations out of all the Beaujolais, but you know, in terms of a general kind of appellation size, it's very small. But most of them just kind of a label as a Beaujolais Village, but that's all starting to change. You will see this. I have also included a Latingnie soil map, the soil map of actually just Latingnie, and this is part of the reason why it's exciting to a lot of producers. So kind of what makes Latingnie different from other sub appellations outside in Beaujolais Village or outside of these 10 crus is that it's a higher altitude than the rest, so it's a little bit cooler. It does keeps, which means it keeps vines fresh, and then it can retain natural acidity. But also soil type wise, if you look at the map, and then again, I'll include a Latingnie soil type map, soil map to this email. It kind of divides in half. So on the west side, you see a lot more green. That's the volcanic, and then on the east side, you see all the red. That's basically granite. The same kind of granite that runs through the rest of Beaujolais, but also all this really highly prized volcanic soils, pockets of volcanic soil that kind of pop up in areas like Juliana, Côte de Pie, Morgon, and Côte de Bruy, also pop up on the western part of Latingnie. So you can kind of get best of the both worlds within one kind of a little sub appellation, and it has the altitude as well. And this is kind of the reason why people are eyeing this area as kind of perhaps the next 11th cru, or at least is finding a very interesting and exciting area to source grapes from. The producers here think that these two different phases of Latingnie is so important, and the wines here are so distinctive that they're actually trying to differentiate themselves from the generic label of Beaujolais Village now. So hence this producer, they're starting to actually label their wines as Beaujolais Latingnie rather than Beaujolais Village, because they believe that the terroir of Latingnie is so distinctive and different from the rest of Village that it should be distinguished. There's a whole association of quality kind of oriented producers here in Latingnie. I included a picture of them. I will include a picture of them in the email, which also this producer, Prunelle is a part of. There are about like 25 producers that are in there. They are actually, I found this out during the research for this week's tasting, that there's already a dossier or a statement that's prepared, and then they're trying to kind of file with INAO, which is the French wine governing body that kind of gives the appellation status or cru status. And then they're looking for promotion to cru. They're not necessarily looking for the promotion of cru Beaujolais, but they're also not looking to establish Beaujolais Latingnie because it already exists. It's existed since 1936, but they're just trying to distinguish themselves from the rest of Beaujolais Village by restricting things like yield, putting in a better quality control protocols in place, just so that they can continue to make Latingnie a better wine. So this is an exact phrase that I actually pulled out from that article that I was reading. It says, in the end, it's not about creating a new appellation. It's been there since 1936, but we want to properly document what there is and the certification behind it, and for instance, tightening the yields from 58 hectoliters per hectare, the maximum for Beaujolais Village, to 50 for Beaujolais Latingnie. So, and for you rookies who are not familiar with why this matters, basically when you restrict yield, amount of juice that you can get per hectare, just gets more concentrated. Only way you can do that is basically intentionally reducing the yield, which means you go out, oftentimes you go around and do what's called green harvest, where they will actually cut out some of the berries in the vines, just so, and then what happens is that all the energy from the vines get concentrated into those berries, and so you develop more flavors, you develop more concentration, complexity. That's the whole idea. Hence you make better, quote unquote, better and more quality wines. We also consider the privileging indigenous yeast, limiting the amount of sulfur used, and encouraging vignerons to limit the use of a thermal vinification. It's not about banning, just quote unquote limiting. It would be symbolic, like moving from December to March, the possibility of to commercialize the wines of this appellation, and of course trying to avoid the use of low prices as the main tool to sell the wines. Just noted here, in case if you're not familiar with the Beaujolais history, that's probably quite confusing here what she means. So use of emphasizing things like indigenous yeast, So yeah, instead of using commercial yeast, we're talking about going back to that tenets of natural winemaking. Limiting the amount of sulfur. Sulfur is essentially this wine does get a little bit of sulfur at bottling, but it's essentially a antiseptic. It kills off all the bacteria, all the enzymes, all the good ones, all the bad ones, non-discriminately. The idea is to sterilize the wine, but they don't want to do that. There are a lot of Beaujolais producers don't want to do that, and particularly in Latingnie, they want this appellation, the Beaujolais and Latingnie, to be known as like an environmentally sound, sustainability driven, natural, really natural wine, minimally inventionist wine making appellation. So that's why they're pushing for these kind of things to be actually put into the law, so that if you're going to put Beaujolais Latingnie on the label, that it means that it's guaranteed to have certain amount of these practices guaranteed, as opposed to trying to get Beaujolais and Latingnie promoted to a cru status like those 10 crus. So yeah, no sulfur used. Limit the use of thermovinification. So what that is, basically heating up the must, the juice, to kind of jumpstart the fermentation. It doesn't sound so bad, but basically it's cheating. If you haven't really taken care of your grapes, and then you haven't really proliferated not only the diversity but the quantity of yeast bacteria in your grape in the cellar, in the vineyard, oftentimes the juice, the must, struggles to start fermentation or start fermenting. So oftentimes the trick to that is basically heating up the must, getting it warmer so these bacteria can start moving. That's called thermovinification. And they're trying to ban that practice, saying it's another way to say that the work must be done. The hard work must be done in the vineyard, as opposed to trying to take a shortcut in the cellar. Like I said, it's not about banning, just quote unquote limiting. It's symbolic, like moving from December to March, the possibility to commercialize the wines of this appellation. So, Beaujolais Nouveau, we talked about this for a second, but that happens on the third Thursday of November, I believe. Is that third Thursday? No, that's Thanksgiving. Anyways, it's in November. I think it's the second Thursday. I forget exactly which Thursday it is, but it's in November. It is the first day legally that you can sell wine from that vintage. If you think about it, that's very soon. Oftentimes, grapes get harvested in September, October. So as soon as it's done fermenting, you're bottling it and selling it off, and that's essentially what Beaujolais Nouveau is. It's that first wine that you can commercially legally sell from that vintage. So what they're saying is maybe we limit that. So move the date from December to March. So it has time for the wines to develop and age and mature before they can actually sell it. So they're purposely, intentionally trying to put in some measures to make Beaujolais Latingnie mean something. Basically to be a guarantor of quality or some sort of a winemaking, better winemaking, so to speak. So, and making sure that this area is not driven by all these commodity winemakers, mass producers that are just buying up all these wines because it's outside of cru, it's cheap, and then driven by low prices, which is what has happened in southern Beaujolais, what has happened in many different parts outside of these crus. Even within some of these crus, that is still a big practice. A lot of these small kind of producers, all their grapes just get bought up by these mass producers, and co-ops are big trade structures here in Beaujolais, where they just gobble up all these grapes very cheap. So, all right, who makes this? Prunelle de Navacelle is the name of the producer. It's a young, pioneering woman winemaker from an emerging kind of appellation, and quite frankly, it's one of the most exciting kind of area, but also the producer from this area. I tasted her wine a few years back, and I've been wanting to work with her wine for a long time, but she just makes such little amount of wine. It rarely ever makes enough quantity into DC market for me to work with it, to put it in a Beauj box. But the fact that it actually made it, we just caught it at the right time. And we got it this time, so I'm pretty excited. But anyways, a picture of her is included in the email that's gonna go out. She makes a very small amount of kind of a personal project. This is her personal project. Her family has been making wine for a long time. Her family, she's the fourth generation of the Peru family to make wine. But the personal project wine, her family owns a winery at her family chateau called Chateau du Basti. There's a picture of a Chateau du Basti in the email that I'll be sending out as well. That's the home of her family, Peru family, and they've been living there since 1482, so pretty fucking long time. Prunelle is one of 6 children. She's currently 4th generations of the Peru family that live together at Chateau du Basti. But including Prunelle's actually 104-year-old grandma, I learned, who actually began the modern wine estate with her husband. So I guess it's a family has been living there in the chateau, and they've been growing grapes. But the winemaking facility and the bottling wines for the family only started 3 generations ago with her grandmother and grandfather. The family estate has always been in polyculture, so the winemaking is, or the grapes are just one part of the produce, a lot of different products that they make. Though she grew up in the vines, she didn't immediately get into wine. She graduated from college in 2004, and this is in her own words in one of the articles I read. She quote unquote lived 10 lives in 10 years. She worked in a lot of hotels, doing a lot of caterings and things like that in Berlin and London. And then around when she turned 28, she developed the desire to kind of get back to the basics and realized that her interest and passion really lied in agriculture. So in 2014, she moved back home to Beaujolais. Then she studied viticulture in Mâcon, or in the Mâconnais, which is one of the southern regions of Burgundy. Before beginning, and then in 2017, she began making her own project and own wine under her own name, which is the current project that we're tasting today. So her first 1.3 hectares of vineyard that she started out with, she actually started in Régnier, not in Latingnie, even though her family has been in Latingnie for a long time. By the way, she received that first 1.3 hectare in a trade with her friend Julien Saunier, and that's a familiar name here in Beauj Box. We featured him quite a few times, right? Makes a delicious Régnier based producer, but so she farms it with her husband, who's also a agroecologist from Normandy, where his family is a syrup farmer. So comes from a line of farmers, and then he studied agroecology, and he helps with cover crops, kind of regenerative farming, biodynamic farming, organic sustainability, and all those things, maintaining healthy living soil and increasing that biodiversity and all those good things, is basically what they do now. So now, since 2017, she's grown the size from 1.3 hectares to 4 hectares. Still very, very small, and that's part of the reason why it's been so difficult to get her wines, because there's just not enough here. So she farms 4 hectares total between Latingnie and Régnier. Only 3 of those 4 hectares is in production at the moment. The other one is just being farmed. It's very new, and then the vines are not old enough to really produce enough to make wine. But yeah, just 1 hectare, 1.3 hectare I mentioned is what's used for this Beaujolais Latingnie. So very, very small, very, very rare thing to get our hands on. So I'm pretty excited about that. I am attaching also a video. I'm going to send you a link to the video that if you're interested, you should watch. It's an interview with Prunelle herself, talking about, it's a vintage report. So 2021, this actual particular vintage that we're tasting, is her kind of take on what happened in 2021 and all of that. It's pretty interesting. If you're a geek like me, you may find it pretty boring if you're not into it. But I don't know. I always had, hearing and getting context behind the wine always makes the wine taste better, if you ask me. So I think it's a pretty fun thing to do. All right, so this wine Hand-selected, harvested 80-year-old Gamay vines planted on pink granite and clay at 400 meter, which is relatively high for Beaujolais. It's not super high in the grand spectrum of things. For example, like this month we're in Argentina in our monthly box, where the vineyards get up to like 5,000 meters, right? So 400 meters is not super high, but for this Beaujolais, it's not. It's not low. Let's put it that way. By the way, there will also be a picture file that I'm attaching to email, a bunch of them. So there's a picture of Prunelle. There's a picture of where the Prunelle's vineyards are. This bottling is made from 3 different plots within Latingnie, and then it kind of shows you where her vineyards are within Latingnie. They're all, as you can see in that map, they're all kind of in the eastern part of Latingnie, so very granite heavy area. So that's why this is all grown on pink granite. Picture of the cellar, Chateau de Bastille. This wine is also aged in Foudre, which is this gigantic old neutral barrel. Just to give you a size of idea of how big it is, there's a picture that I'm including with actually a picture of Prunelle standing in front of Foudre, just to kind of give you some perspectives. And then there's an old vine Gamay, goblet training method, which is basically bush train. So there's no trellis; it's just letting it grow as it is. The arms kind of look pretty gnarly. I love these kind of old goblet trained old vines. So there's a picture of that, as well as there's a picture of a Prunelle actually emptying out a cement tank, which is where this wine is fermented. So hand-selected, harvest 80-year-old Gamay vines planted on pink granite and clay at 400 meters. Spontaneous fermentation, like I mentioned, so all native yeast. It does go through 18 days of semi-carbonic maceration. Very traditional thing to do here. So this is also time to talk about carbonic maceration. So carbonic maceration, so most wines that we think of is a bacterial fermentation, meaning yeast, which is a bacteria, right? So you crush the grapes, you press the juice, you leave it on the skins if it's a red wine, you take it off the skins and separate out the skins and the juice, the must, if it's a white wine. But essentially the yeast, which is a bacteria, eats up the sugar, it pees out alcohol, and then it farts out CO2. That's essentially what fermentation is, right? But in carbonic maceration, what you do is you take a whole bunch, meaning you don't de-stem, you don't take the berries off the stems, you keep the whole stem, and then you kind of gently stack them on top of each other, and obviously some on the bottom are going to burst. So there's going to be some bacterial fermentation that happens on the bottom, but in general, they're kind of staying intact so the berries don't burst. And you take care to make sure the berries don't burst. So we're trying to minimize it as much as possible. You stack it up, and then finally on top of the fermentation tank, you put some CO2, carbon dioxide on it. And so essentially you're creating an anaerobic condition, meaning lack of oxygen. So those berries don't come in contact with the oxygen. And then when you leave it just like that, all the enzymes from the inside of the berries start fermenting the sugar. So it's an enzymatic fermentation as opposed to bacterial fermentation. So intracellular enzymatic fermentation begins when you put whole berries, the berries under, in an anaerobic condition, under a blanket of carbon dioxide. And why do you want to do that? So when you do that, it basically, so what happens is, so berries start fermenting from the inside, pressures build up, and finally berries pop, juices come out, gets in touch with the yeast, and then the bacterial fermentation begins, more CO2 is released, and it kind of presses increases the pressure within the tank, and then more juice comes out, more berries pop, and then the all fermentation cycle begins. That's the whole, basically that's the carbonic maceration. Semi-carbonic maceration is when you don't necessarily put the CO2 on it, the blanket, you just leave the whole berries, like the gently stacked berries, and then you just leave it. You don't crush it, you don't press it, and then again, as the bottom fermentation begins, the CO2 is released, so all that blanket kind of starts to build up, and then so it's kind of half bacterial, half enzymatic kind of a thing. Is why it's called semi-carbonic. But when you basically put wines on carbonic maceration, what it does is that it doesn't extract, it's a very gentle extraction. It doesn't extract a lot of tannins, these polyphenolic compounds, like tannins. And then the color, you don't pick up a lot of color either. And then the flavor of the juice, the wine that comes out, is very, very basically pure fruit expression. And oftentimes also the character of the fruit changes. So instead of like a fresh berry, sometimes you get these, and you're gonna hear this word quite a bit throughout Beauj, which is high tone. What it basically means is like a candied kind of fruit. So it's kind of this artificial, little bit different. It's not full, fresh actual fruit, but a little bit like a candied, confectionery, artificial fruit thing. That kind of stuff pops up. And then in a full carbonic maceration, things like banana, things a little more tropical can pop out, bubblegum. But in semi-carbonic, you get a lot of the high tone fruit, which is the candied fruit, without much phenolic compounds like tannins. Again, it's all about kind of the pure expression of the fruit. Those guys, the Gang of Four, is kind of the ones who started playing around with the carbonic maceration. They realized it resulted in wine. It did really well with the Gamay, and that's why that tradition has continued now. So when you're talking about quote unquote traditional fermentation, when you see traditional fermentation written on the label in Beaujolais, what they're talking about semi-carbonic. So, but depending on the producer, some do full carbonic. We do have some full carbonic maceration Beaujolais here. And also there's a degree to difference, right? How long do you put it under that CO2 blanket? How soon do you take it off the CO2? Then you press it off, and then you start the bacterial fermentation. All that matters in the final resulting style of the wine. But some are full carbonic, some are semi-carbonic, some are actually full-on Burgundian method, meaning they don't do any of that. They actually just crush the grapes, let it ferment, and then the whole thing is done in bacterial fermentation. So all those things result in very distinctively different styles of wine, and that's part of kind of what we're going to explore this month. But just know that, just kind of help you calibrate your palate and senses. What we're starting off today, this wine is semi-carbonic. So 18 days of semi-carbonic, like I said, put it in a cement tank. The after carbonic, 18 days, gentle and low pressing in an old wood vertical press. It's a very traditional way of pressing. It's basically basket. Imagine like the slats of a basket, and you put berries in it, and then just there's pressing it down so all the juice comes out, and you're basically separating the juice off the skins. Press into a traditional cement tank where the fermentation completes, and then that picture that I'm sending you in that email is a Prunelle emptying the cement tank. That's the cement tank essentially that this wine was made in. And then wine gets racked, meaning when you leave the wine for a long time, the sediment kind of settles out to the bottom, and then all the clear portion, you basically siphon it off into a different vessel. That's called racking. So the wine is racked into a 2,500 liter foudre, which is an old, big, gigantic wooden neutral barrel, and ages there for 12 months, for a year. So why do you put it in foudre instead of just leaving it in cement tank? So one is neutral, meaning it's been used many, many times. So it's not about flavor. It's not about new oak flavor or anything. It's just a vessel. But putting in a big tank like that, and then wood is a little porous. So there's a little bit of micro oxygenation that happens between across the wood grains. So by putting the wine in a foudre, essentially you're introducing a little bit of oxygen, which means it kind of rounds out the flavors. Also, it develops the flavors. So yeah, it's both for texture as well as a flavor, but it is distinctively different than had it been aged in cement or stainless steel, which is not porous at all. Then after a year in foudre, it's bottled, unfiltered, unfined, those words again, with a minute amount of sulfur only at bottling. So there's no sulfur used anytime. As a winemaker, you can put sulfur at any time, right? You can put sulfur as soon as the berries arrive in the cellar, killing off all the bacteria, including yeast and enzymes. Keep it really sterile. But as is the case with pretty much every producer that's featured in this Beauj box, there's a minute amount of sulfur just at the end, just to make sure that the wine that goes in the bottle doesn't do anything funky, stays kind of stable during the shipment and all of that. They put the little bit amount of sulfur at the end, but no sulfur in between. Is the idea. All right. I know there was a lot of talking. The first one is always kind of a long one, just because I, gotta explain the history of Beaujolais and why we're doing this and all of that. But the subsequent ones won't be super long like that. But anyways, we've made it. So now we get to tasting it. So I'll be sending this out as well, but we're gonna taste it through the grid. And for those of you who've never tasted wines through the grid, here it is. So this is what we do here at 6-Foot Wine Club. But that's not to say you should live and die by this thing. But this is a WCT level 3 grid. This is basically what we wine professionals are taught how to taste wine. And by the way, this will be in your email. So there's appearance, nose, palate, conclusion. The whole idea is that this is help you systematically and deductively taste wine, so you can get to a conclusion about that wine that's in your glass that you don't know what it is. In our case, we're not blind tasting it. We know exactly what wine we're tasting, but nonetheless, this kind of helps us kind of uniform our language, kind of conform our tasting experience, something that is highly subjective, but so in some ways it's very useful, but in some ways it's very limiting. Some of the wines that we're going to taste don't necessarily fit neatly into this box. These kind of descriptors that you see in the second page of the grid are the only ones you are supposed to use, but obviously depending on where you are, like if, as you can see, this is very much if you grew up in England, which is where WCT Wine Spirit Education Trust come from, you probably are familiar with these grapes, but if you flavors and aromas. But if you grew up in different parts of the world, you may have grown up with a complete different set of aromas and flavors. Again, doesn't mean you're wrong for calling out the things that you grew up with. Like if you grew up in Jamaica and you smell breadfruit on wine, are you not supposed to call that out because it's not in WCT grid? I don't think so. I think you should still be able to call it out, and you may be right. It may even be a closer thing than whatever's on here. So it is very limiting. It is very biased in certain ways. So don't let this be the end all be all. Just use it as a kind of loose guide. But yeah, this will help you calibrate some senses, your senses. But anyways, here we are. So let's taste it. Appearance, how the wine looks. Nose, how the wine smells. Palate, how the wine tastes. We're gonna taste for two different things: structure and flavor. In conclusion, finally, we put it all together, and then we get to calling a quality level as well as ageability. So let's go through it. So from the top. All right, sorry, appearance. So get yourself like 2 to 3 ounces, like a half glass of wine, and then you're gonna look through the deepest core from top to bottom. If you have like a piece of paper, white piece of paper, that's great to put it behind. If not, just you can use your hand. But daylight is the best, but obviously I don't have that right now. So we're gonna look through. I'm gonna say that's about, I don't know. I don't want to call all the way deep, but maybe like. First of all, this wine is clear, but I can tell this wine is not like filter refined. If this wine has been filtered and refined, this would be translucent. There'd be so much light just reflecting off the surface of this wine. It'd be like star bright, but it's not that. You can tell this wine has not been filtered or refined, but this wine is clear, I would say. Just maybe a little hazy, but yeah, I won't go as far as calling this hazy. Intensity, I'll call this about medium. So idea is a pale is you can read through the core and read every little thing that's in behind it. Medium is you can kind of make out there are letters there, but you can't really read everything. Deep is when you can't see shit. It's just completely opaque. So I'll call this about medium. And then color wise, I'm gonna call this ruby, but there's some like a purplish, bluish hue to it as well. So it's not a pure ruby, but it's mostly ruby with. So on an exam, if I got this, I would say this is a clear wine with an evidence of being unfiltered, with a medium intense ruby with a flecks of blue or purple is what I would write on the exam. Any other observations? I don't see any sediments. I don't see any bubbles. So it looks all good. Legs or tears. This is what we're talking about. When you swirl it, all these legs or tears that are coming down. Those are called legs or tears. It's viscosity essentially. It's a function of sugar and alcohol. But later when we get to palate, we taste the sweetness. We verify the sweetness and we verify the alcohol. So I don't really know why they want us to talk about viscosity. Just kind of guessing it by looking at it. I think it's kind of stupid. Also, a lot of people, I've heard this in my 15 plus years of working in restaurants, from many people coming in and be like, oh, look at those beautiful legs. This wine must be really good. No, you sound like an idiot when you say that. Legs have nothing to do with quality of the wine. It has everything to do with just the viscosity. All right, let's get to the nose. This wine is clean. This wine is sound. This wine is not squeaky clean. You can tell. And then this is going to be the kind of running theme with Beaujolais, especially with the kind of natural wine producers. You can tell this is not made in some, squeaky clean lab condition like, stainless steel tank full of facility. Sorry. There's some. It's not super. I wouldn't say it's funky or dirty or anything like that, but like you can tell this wine is not 100% clean. But for the intents and purposes of this grid, I'm gonna say this one is clean. This one is sound. There's no fault here. There's nothing faulty. Like the most common one is being corked, which is caused by dirty cork or tainted cork. The wine will smell like wet cardboard. Damp basement, all the things will be very muted, but it doesn't smell like that. Intensity. So move it around, start moving it towards your nose. See when you start smelling it. So about right there, like maybe an inch. Almost like as when my nose starts to touch the rim is when I start smelling it. I'm also a little stuck. So yeah, it's a little off the rim, but like not super far off the rim. So when that nose touches the rim, it's basically medium. When you start smelling it, when the nose is in the glass and you can't really smell it, it's medium minus, and light is essentially like you can't really smell anything. Medium plus is when the nose is like 2 to 3 inches, a few inches off the glass. Pronounced is even further than that. So this, given right there, what is that? Maybe it's a little further than I thought. So this is like approaching a medium plus. I would say this is about medium. It's not like super expressive to me, but it's not nothing. I would say this is definitely medium, but moving towards medium plus. Somewhere between medium to medium, low end of medium plus, higher end of medium is basically where I would make this. But yeah, you know what? I'm gonna call this medium plus. Like that's actually pretty far. That's like couple inches, right? Yeah, so I'm gonna call this medium plus. Medium plus aromas of, what do you get? And so you go to the second page, and then you just go down the list. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. Don't overthink this. So floral, do you get any floral? I do. I get a little bit like a violet, a little like a blue flower. Very typical thing with the Gamay. Particularly Beaujolais Gamay. You get this kind of like a violet kind of tone running through, depending on where you are. Some of it will maybe go more red, like a rose, but oftentimes this blue, violet, blue flower thing is a very common thing. So I get a little bit of violet. No green fruit for me, no citrus fruit for me, no stone fruit for me, no tropical fruit for me. And then now we're getting to red and black fruit. So what do you got? I get a mixture of both actually, but to me this is more like brighter red fruit than it is a black fruit. Again, I get both. Brambly is another word that you're gonna see. It's under the black fruit category. Very British word, where it's like just like this bunch of berries that are popping out, but you can't tell if it's red or black really, even though it's like under black fruit here, but it's like a very distinct kind of berry, nondescript berry smell. I get a lot of that here, but also to me, there's some redness here. Not like cranberry, but like red, red plum, but a lot of that kind of bramble somewhere between red and black. There's some black cherry here as well. Yeah, there's some plumminess here, maybe a little more red plum than into the black plum. But yeah, so I get a little bit of both. It's a mixture. In terms of quality of the fruit, it's really fresh, it's really ripe. There's nothing underripe, there's nothing overripe. It's like perfectly fresh and perfectly ripe. Herbaceousness, nothing green here. Sometimes you get wines that are like a little under, like very green and herbaceous and herbal, particularly for those of you, I mean, a lot of you have been around, but not last Beauj box, but the Beauj box, 2 Beauj boxes ago, that's when majority of the wines that were available, the Beaujolais that was available, was 2021. And 2021 was particularly hard vintage. And again, if you watch that video, you'll hear Prunelle talk about the vintage. It's really cool. They get a lot of frost as well. So there's a lot of just underlying, basically, greenness, the herbaceousness that ran through that vintage. It's super lean. It was a difficult vintage. Not a whole lot of fruit. So I'm surprised in 2021 with Prunelle that you're not getting any green. Yeah, you're getting really actually ripe fruit here, fresh ripe fruit, which again, even in bad vintages with a good producer, they can produce excellent wines. So vintage is not about everything, but in general, 21 was a difficult vintage. So the fact that she's able to reach this kind of ripeness and maturity is a testament to her farming. So yeah, fresh, ripe, really nothing underripe, nothing green, no real spices here for me. There's definitely granite influence here. I smell like a granite dust, like a rock does. Yeah, there's actually the fact that this would be Beaujolais Village if it was in Beaujolais Latingnie, right? At a Beaujolais Village level, that we're getting this much minerality is fantastic. Usually with the Beaujolais, it's not until you get to cru level that you start getting into the real, the granite and minerality and all of that. But even here, I mean, again, that's why Beaujolais Latingnie is special and different when they're trying to set themselves apart. But I get a ton of like this granitic, kind of like a rock, crushed rock kind of thing here. No secondary or no tertiary. So primary is basically all the aromas that come from the fruit or the fermentation itself. The secondary is basically what happens after the fermentation is done. So putting this wine in cement and then putting this wine in the foudre and letting it age, that's after fermentation. So fermentation is over, all the sugar has been eaten, and then now you're aging the wine. And if you put that in a new oak barrels, you get these kind of flavors that are here, like vanilla, cloves, nutmeg, things like that. MLF, malolactic fermentation, that's what that stands for. This is where if you leave the wine on its own at a room temperature, there's all the malic acid in the wine converts into lactic acid. It's just a natural thing. Every red wine pretty much all goes through it. Some white wines, depending on winemaker's choice, they have their MLF blocked. Some get partial, some get full. But malic acid, think like green apple, really sharp acid. Lactic acid, think lactose, like yogurt, sour cream. Still tart acid, but the shape, the nature of it is different. It's rounder, softer. So that's why you get things like butter, cheese, and cream when malic acid converts into lactic acid. Yeast, when you expose a wine and lets it rest on lees, which are dead yeast cells, you get these kind of like brioche, doughy, bready kind of a savoriness. Champagne, old age cava is a great example of that. And then tertiaries are all the wine. What happens when the wines have been aged? This is not, this is still rather quite new. 2021 vintage, young. So it's too young to be really be displaying any of these like tertiary flavors and aromas. But yeah, things like all the fresh fruit that we mentioned in the primary turns into dry fruit, figs, raisins, or non-fruit aromas. Things like leather, forest floor, earth, mushroom, things like that. But for me, this is pretty much all primary fruit driven. Touch of floral, very, very classic kind of like a Gamay Beaujolais profile here. Some floral, but it's really pretty. Like it's just not, I hate to put gender on wine, and I know I'm about to do that, but it's just really pretty. Like this is just there's a lot of feminine touch here. It's very feminine wine. Just kind of like gentle, pretty. It's not like burly, kind of like tannic and like punch you in the face kind of stuff. But yeah, there's something really gentle, elegant, and pretty about this wine. So floral, the kind of blue flower, that kind of brambly. There's some black fruit here. There's definitely some red fruit here as well, but kind of both. Really fresh, really ripe. Nothing underripe, nothing overripe, nothing green, and then just this layer of rock dust here. Like there's more minerality here than I would find in many cru Beaujolais I've tasted in the past. So it's pretty incredible. All right, palate. Let's taste it. So we're gonna taste for structure and we're gonna taste for flavor. Structure is anything but flavor, essentially. So alcohol, body, acid, alcohol, tannin, things like that. So let's start from the top. First of all, that's delicious. That's really fucking good. Also, holy acid. Love the acid on this thing. All right, sweetness. Dry means lack of sugar. Sweet means presence of sugar. And this is looking at the entire world of every wine that's ever been made. So 90%, if not more, most of the wines made in the world are dry wines. So when in doubt, call it dry. Pretty much every wine this in Beauj box is going to be dry. Is there's no clear cutoff like so sugar is measured in grams per liter in the wine world. The whole unfortunately it's not clear cut. It's like 0 to 15 is dry, 15 to 25 is off dry. Like it's not like that because there's a lot of perceptive things that are happening here as well. But we try our best to kind of as a wine professional try to kind of discern how much sugar is on the wine. But pretty much this whole Beauj box, every single one of them is going to be dry. But like luscious dry, we're talking about like one example that comes to my mind is like Tokai Hungarian dessert wine that gets up to like 650 grams per liter. It's a lusciously sweet dessert wine. But dry is like somewhere between 0 to like 10, I would say 12 maybe, but 10 is usually a good thing. So yeah, this one is definitely dry. Acidity, move it around and see where you feel it. For me, it's back of my jaw, right here. Some people feel it between their eyebrows. Some people feel it in their sinus. You gotta figure out where you feel your acid. Firm acid, love it. This is like a lower end of medium plus, high end of medium. I struggle to go all the way to call it medium plus. Usually with a Gamay, we're talking about like a medium acid. But this particular one, it's like a noticeable amount of acid. So I'm gonna call this medium plus just to kind of distinguish it a little bit. But yeah, if you call this medium, I think it's a totally acceptable answer. But yeah, trying to help you calibrate your senses. Tannin. This is that polyphenolic compound I was telling you about that's found in skins, seeds, stems. It causes like drying sensation in your mouth. If you ever want to experience it, like get a bag of green tea, 2 bags of green tea, like over steep it, like steep it for like half an hour in your tea and take a sip of that tea, or like suck on that tea bag and see what it feels like in your mouth. That's tannin. It causes a drying sensation. Sometimes it can be bitter. A lot of tannin can taste bitter and brings the astringency, but it also acts as a preservative. Any wine that's going to be meant to be aged for a long time, particularly the red wine, has tannin, some level of tannin in it, usually high level of tannin in it. So yeah, see. There's some tannin here. I feel it. Move it around, blistering the shit out of your mouth. You know, coat every inch of your mouth. But I feel it, you know, going across my gum on the side. I'm gonna call this about like medium minus, not a whole lot, you know. Again, a lot of these wines are going through carbonic maceration with a whole bunch, which means it's not coming in contact with the skins and the stems for a very long time, right? And that's the whole point of carbonic maceration. It's that you're trying not to extract all these really polyphenolic compounds. So you're never gonna have wines that are like, or Beaujolais that's super grippy, super tannic. It's just not gonna happen. I mean, unless you do some Burgundian method, where it's like a full-on maceration method. But even then, Gamay doesn't have that much tannin. It's not a super tannic grape variety. So at most, you're gonna get to medium plus in certain crus. But you know, in general, we're talking about medium minus, lower end and medium, kind of is what we're talking about here. Alcohol. Feel how warm your throat feels after you swallow or you spit it out. Get in the game of guessing what percentage each wine that you taste is. To me, this tastes like, you know, 12 and a half, 13. There you go. So yeah, Gamay mostly going to be all right in that, depending on, you know, the vintage, lean to hot years, somewhere between 12 to 13 and a half. You rarely ever going to see it go beyond 13 and a half. 12 and a half to 13 is kind of the average is what you're going to find. So this is right down the middle, right there. Medium is like 12 to 13 and a half. Medium plus is like 13 and a half to 14 and a half. High is 15 and above. Medium minus is like 10 and a half to 11 and a half. Low is like 10 and below. This is essentially how we think of this. Body, this is where Team Milk comes in. Move the wine around. Don't worry about the flavor. Don't worry about anything else. Just pay attention to the viscosity, the weight of the wine. Basically, imagine moving whole milk around the mouth. That's full. Imagine moving 2% around your mouth. That's like medium. Imagine moving skim milk around your mouth. That's light. I know some people get really turned off by thinking about milk while tasting wine, but I just think it's a really apt, good analogy. So anyways, body, move it around. It's got some weight. I'm gonna call this medium, about 2%. It's about what you're gonna find with Gamay too. Mousse, we're gonna talk about that because it's not a sparkling wine. Flavor intensity, I'm gonna call this like, again, kind of like on the nose, lower end of medium plus, higher end of medium. There's nothing shy here, like all the fruits and aromas I mentioned. They're in there. But yeah, I'm gonna call this medium plus just to be generous. But yeah, if you ended up medium, I think that's perfectly acceptable answer. And the flavor characteristic, this is where you go back and kind of check off all the things to see if there's anything that you missed, something that you smell but you don't taste, or vice versa, it's something you didn't smell but you do taste. But I'm confirming everything. I mean, it's violet, bramble, plums, cherries, all really fresh and ripe. Nothing green. And then again, ton of this minerality. I'm loving this minerality about this wine. It's really, really actually quite nice. No secondary, no tertiary, pretty much all staying in the primary right here. Maybe like touch more plum on the palate than I did on the nose, but yeah, honestly, everything that I smelled is being confirmed on the palate. Finally, the finish. How long do the flavors stick around? Still there. Yeah, it immediately hits you. First of all, I immediately get this perceptive like acidity, like my mouth starts watering immediately. All the plum, all that brambly fruit comes in. And then I'm left with that kind of like that granitic, that minerality, the rock dust running through. I'm gonna call this at least medium, bordering on medium plus. So yeah, quality level. So quality level is a function of four things: balance, complexity, concentration, and length. Balance is there anything here that is so overwhelming that it stops you from experiencing other things? I don't think so. I think everything seems to be very much in harmony. There's nothing here that one particular thing that sticks out so much other than others. Acid definitely sticks out here, but not to the level where I can't taste anything because it's so tart. No, I don't feel that way. So this one is very well balanced. Two, complexity. We talked about quite a few different things, fruit, flower, fruit, both red and black, cherries, plums, bramble, all of that, rock dust, right? But it's all in the primary, and even then, it's not like we hit up a lot of different things. It's just like black and red, flower, and rocks, right? So I'm gonna call that about medium, right? It's not hugely complex wine, but yeah, not just one noted wine either. So about medium. And then concentration, we called it, I called it somewhere between medium plus, but being on the nose as well as on the palate, but being generous, we call it medium plus. And then length, again, somewhere between medium plus, but being generous, I'm gonna call that medium plus as well. So looking all the way across, we said this one is balanced, about medium complexity, but medium plus concentration and medium plus intensity, right? So when you take an average of all of that, balance, medium plus. We're landing somewhere between medium plus, maybe going a little bit more towards a very medium plus, right? So when that average is medium plus, that is very good. When that average is medium, it's good. When that average is medium minus, it's acceptable. When that average is low, it's poor. When that average is like pronounced high, that's outstanding. When that average or faulty means there's something wrong with the wine. But we're landing somewhere between basically medium and medium plus. But being generous, I've given a few things to medium plus. So again, being generous, I'm gonna say this one is very good. But this is landing somewhere between good and very good. So if you called it good, I think it's perfectly fine. Level of readiness for drinking and potential for aging. In order for wines to age, you need two things. I talked about tannin earlier, right? So tannin is one of them. But even before we get into tannin, there are two different things in terms of the wine that you need, the components that you need for it to successfully age. One is a structural component, and the other one is a flavor component. And each of those components divides into two subcomponents. So structure divides into tannin and acid, and then flavor divides into intensity, concentration, and complexity. So let's talk about structure first. So does this wine have acid and or tannin? Acid, we said, somewhere between medium and medium plus, right? I call it medium plus, just kind of distinguish it because it does, the acid on this wine hits me. It's noticeable than what I normally find in Beaujolais. So again, in a grand spectrum of all wines, it's not like hugely high acid wine, but within Beaujolais, the acid is one of the noticeable things about this one, is what I like about it. So I call it medium plus, but it's not, so it's decent, right? Medium to medium plus acid. Tannin, we call it medium minus to medium. So there's some tannin, but not a huge amount of tannin. So it's all right. It's not super tannin. It's got a decent amount of backbone. So its structural component serves as a backbone, basically a vertebra for all these flavors to stick onto, so the wine doesn't fall apart while it ages. It has decent backbone. And then the flavor-wise, concentration, and then complexity. We call it medium to medium plus concentration, both on the nose and the palate. And the complexity, we call it about medium. So it's not a hugely, concentrated wine. Decent amount of concentration, but complexity-wise also, there's not a whole lot of different things going on here. And by aging it, basically some of those primary things will turn into tertiary things, adding those non-fruit flavors and aromas. So adding to that complexity, but there's not a whole lot to begin with, and there's not a whole lot of concentration to begin with. So I would say this wine is perfectly fine. I mean, it's 2021, it's 2025 now, so we're going into fourth year, but it's still very fresh. It's still very primary driven, which means this wine is actually holding up quite well. So I would say drink this now. I think this wine is delicious right now. But even at this point, and guessing how long the wine is gonna age it's a guessing game. Anybody who tells you that they know exactly how long this wine is gonna age, they're either lying or they're stupid, or they don't know what they're talking about. So it's having tasted Beaujolais and old Beaujolais for a long time, you kind of get a sense of what kind of characteristics that you need for these kind of wines to age. And knowing Beaujolais, I think this is perfectly delicious right now. I think it will be just fine for another, I don't know, 3 to 5 years. Probably by the time this hits 5th year from now, so which would be 2030, which would be in its 9th year mark, you'll probably definitely start showing some tertiary. I mean, some wines can, age for decades and decades. And that may add to some complexity, right? One of the things that didn't hit that medium to medium plus that was squarely in medium was complexity, right? So maybe having it age a little bit and having some of the tertiary come in will add to the complexity in this wine, will be just fine. So I would say drink this now. This is drinking beautifully right now. But if you want to get a few bottles and lay it down, I think this will be very interesting to see where this wine goes in like 3 to 5 years, I would say. It can probably go even longer than that, but I would say definitely come back and check back in on it in about 3 years. I'll drink another one in 4 years. I'll drink another one in 5 years. At that point, it's getting, you start to see freshness fall off and everything turning into kind of a tertiary, then drink all the rest of it. But for now, I would say drink this now, but hold it for the next 3 to 5 years. That's basically what I would say about this wine. All right. That was long. Again, this is the first week, so this is, I'm almost going into 1 hour and 21 minutes. I don't really know why this first video has gone, I don't think Beauj video has gone ever this long, but so I apologize if it's taking way longer than you thought. But here we are. I'm gonna, and then the last part of all this is the favorite game that everybody wants to play. If you want to guess how much this wine is, pause your video right now, and then you can come back. Ask yourself, how much do you think this is in a retail store? And 2, how much you'd be happy paying for this in a retail store? Pause the video and come back. And this wine is $35 in retail store. So again, we are getting into an area where Beauj is getting more expensive, right? So 35, that's like, I don't know, $20 some, $22, $23 in wholesale is essentially what you're gonna find. The fact that Beaujolais Village, this is a Beaujolais Latingnie, which is a cool and hip emerging area, but the fact that they can kind of get 22 to 23 is a testament to the inflation and the price increase. But yeah, this wine will be about $35 in a retail store is what you'll find this as. All right, so that's the first tasting. I promise the rest is not going to go this long. Usually I keep this way under an hour, like 45 minutes, somewhere between 45 to 30 minutes. 30 minutes to 45 minutes is usually what I do. But yeah, today ran a little long. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. Also, feel free to use that BeauJbox2025 googlegroups.com, at googlegroups.com to communicate with the rest of the people, make some jokes, send us a testimony, tell us what you think about the wine, whether you like it, whether you don't like it. Love to hear it. But yeah, otherwise, toodles. I'll see you all next week.